Hello and welcome to the Ontic Connected Intelligence Podcast. I'm Chuck Randolph, Ontic's Chief Security Officer. Join us as we delve into valuable insights and practical advice that will empower you to navigate the complexities of modern corporate security and risk. We're here to share knowledge from experienced leaders and innovators in the field. All right, get settled and let's dive in. Welcome to the Ontic Connected Intelligence Podcast. Roundtable edition, bringing back to the mic Cindy Marble, Fred Burton, and of course myself, Chuck Randolph. Greetings, fellow thought leaders and aficionados of all things threat management, protective intel, and EP. Has anybody slept since Summit? How long ago was Summit? Feels like 2 months ago already. It was like a week.
It sure does.
And by the way, I know this isn't a weather podcast, but I mean, Fred, you're a native Texan. Cindy, you're a native Texan, but from Houston. I mean, that weather that we had here was crazy with a capital K. I don't think I've ever seen a dust up like that in the upper atmosphere here.
No, that was
No.
that was Arizona kind of dust storm.
Well, it impacted people from getting there on time. Some people, I mean, I know myself personally, I think both of you got texts from people saying, "Hey, we bypassed Austin altogether." I think I was talking to Ryan Long, and he's like, "Yeah, we bypassed Austin, went to Houston, and just sat and waited for the wind to come down." And he was like, told me at some point, I was just thinking I'll get out if I could and just go rent a car and drive there. But it was pretty ominous in the afternoon. Just the sky got dark. It made me think of of a dust bowl. So,
Yeah, you can see how the wildfire threats down here are pretty brutal at times, and you can see why.
well, I mean, it just goes to show, even even here at Ontic, we have our own monitoring spun up, and we were watching wildfires and incoming planes and all of it. So events are events, you know. This one continues to be spectacular. I think another great keynote in Liz Wiseman. We had more trainings, I think, this year. We did move out to the Omni Barton Creek, which I thought was pretty swanky. Pretty swanky. Fred, I mean, did you feel uncomfortable staying there? I mean, you had like 15 handlers that would come in and draw your bath and prepare your evening gown.
Well, I always look at accommodations as my baseline is a tent in Pakistan. So
Well, we're definitely beyond that.
anything better than that, I'm good to go. But as someone who's been here since the first summit, Chuck and Cindy, I must say that the scope and just the I don't know, the choreographing of all the different events and so forth is pretty interesting and amazing. It kind of reminds me of a mini UNGA with all the
Mm.
different events going on and the breakout sessions and so forth. So great logistical work on the part of the backroom folks at Ontech that always go unheralded.
I think the first summit had what, Fred, 75 people there.
Yeah, at best, I think we all fit in like one room, and uh, that was pretty much it.
But we did get boots though, Fred. If you remember, we the Airstream that had the boots, and we all
Oh
got.
yeah, that's right.
I was at the first summit. I've been
Were
in
you?
every summit. Yeah,
Were
Yeah.
you there as a Sigma employee?
I was. Yep.
So, Cindy, let me ask you real quick, just for like a historical sake, at that first summit as an attendee, what was Optic has a certain buzz around us. People like us. I mean, we're trustworthy. We bring the community together. I mean, what was the buzz then as compared to now? The same, better?
Um, I mean, there was definitely buzz. It was all new to me, coming from a world of protection and protective intelligence and being operational to going into a technology world. I was just kind of, my eyes were just, wide open and trying to absorb it all. But there was definitely a buzz. And of course, I think there were like 50 people, maybe. I think somebody said the other day there were 50 people to the first summit. I could be wrong. But
Well, and we
we
were we
had
were
almost at
600
700.
plus this year,
Yeah,
right? Yeah,
yeah.
600 plus. That
So
includes
that
opticians.
buzz
So
was just like, taking it to, a whole 'nother level.
well, I think something that we do at Ontic, we've all been to our fair share of conferences, from the IPSB to OSAC and ATAP and ARIP, and insert anyone that I missed here. Um, I'm sure I'll get emails about that. Sorry. Um, but I think one thing that makes a good conference for our industry is one, you've got to give people the ability to network because that's very important. I think to all industries, but for sure ours. I think you got to give them relevant things to talk about and not fill every nook and cranny with something because people show up and they're immediately out on their phone dealing with something. Um, Cindy, to that point, I mean, you were kind of, as always, you're kind of key to the trainings that happen. I mean, what were your observations about the trainings and things that went on?
Well, we did, from the threat assessment side, we did 3 trainings. Typically, we've done 1, just a basic workplace violence, which we continue to do. And then we did a scenario-based training that took the basic and kind of, elevated it to another level, and just walked people through, real cases that we've sanitized and, changed the names to protect the innocent thing. Um, and then we did building a program, and they were all packed. They were full. People were trying to get in that didn't have the chance to register early, and I just thought there was a hunger for um, program development, but and also a hunger for understanding threats.
Do you think, Cindy, do you think that the political assassination of the United Healthcare CEO contributed to the interest in that block?
Absolutely, absolutely, 100%. And I think that was one of the I guess one of the underlying themes of what I took away from Summit is that, executive protection is, first and foremost on everyone's mind, and trying to get that executive buy-in to have programs, to have workplace violence programs, to have executive protection programs.
It's interesting. I think EP or close protection, executive protection, if you think about the lines of effort, within any CSO's playbook, her number one or number two line of effort is going to be EP, whether people want to admit it or not, or whether the organizations admit it. It is, and I believe you're right. Not only Fred, the terrible murder of Brian Thompson back in December, but now the growing or the growing community that seems to be that of, like, kill your boss, eat the rich. That's kind of taken Mangione as their folk hero, and we could probably spend an entire 40 minutes talking about all the stuff the three of us are just tracking on and passing back and forth on Slack on the things we're seeing. So I think it will remain. And let's face it, we have a political climate that is just continues to be tumultuous as well. I think that all adds into this is important. And also, I think, Cindy, you said it before you turned the mics on. This workplace violence. Hey, how are people's emotions going to play out in the workplace, whether they're going after a CEO or they're going after each other.
One of the questions that I asked, I actually opened up my training with the question of who thinks that the assassination of Brian Thompson was a workplace violence event. And I was really surprised at how many hands didn't raise. I thought that to me, because it is work related, because he was targeted or the industry was targeted, that is workplace violence. And I think one of the things that folks have a hard time wrapping their heads around when they're building workplace violence programs is connecting that to their executive protection programs. And one of the major themes of Summit was breaking down silos and having information flow. So we talked a lot about that, in the training about making sure that information is passed, whether you think it's internal or external, or what we call unaffiliated, which would be a Mangione. It's one of those things where information needs to be passed.
mean, literally, as we're talking here, I just got a text from somebody with a picture of those playing cards saying looks like they're about to be on the market, so to speak. So I think you're right. We also, our good friend and friend to Ontic, Tim Kirkham, did a insider risk training that I mean I did not attend because I was doing the CSO activity, but everything I've heard from that was also a good session. I mean, did you guys get any feedback?
I heard the same. Unfortunately, I was doing my training at the same time, so, probably the only negative I heard about any trainings was people wish that they could have been in 2 places at one time, so
Yeah, it's well, we're not at the. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're not at the Omni next year. We're back downtown, right? I mean, primarily, I think a lot of this was driven by South by, which had all the hotels. Fred, they're all waiting for your premiere, so all the hotels were booked up. Um,
Yeah, I had mixed reactions by some concerning the location. A lot of folks said that they thought that they were able to stay more focused being out in the hill country, and that the distractions of being downtown at times in previous years were interesting. But I literally had nobody that had any negative comments other than to pile on what Cindy said. I was doing a couple sessions myself, so it was difficult to try to attend those that you really wanted to, just logistically. So it's always been that way. I don't know any other way that you could choreograph these kinds of things just due to the scope of people and so forth.
you could make it longer, but that would, I think, that would wear everybody out and probably drag the Ontic system to a grinding halt at some point. Fred, what about yeah, you were on a couple panels. I was on a couple panels. I mean, what were your observations or thoughts around them?
Well, I think to piggyback on what you and Cindy have already touched on, obviously the Mangione attack was the elephant in the room, and and pretty much every session. And then the geopolitical one that I did, obviously, the world events today have created so many problems around the globe, and it seems to be snowballing and escalating, and you know, ebbing back and forth depending upon the news cycle. Um, you look at some of the domestic violence that's taking place here in the United States, targeting, for example, the Tesla dealerships around the country and so forth. We're we're delving back into the days of rage from the 60s and the 70s, it appears, in many ways. So, I want to say something, Chuck, that you touched on earlier. It's fascinating to me, and you could probably get a PhD in this topic alone. Is I've always argued that the executive protection chief position, in many ways, is more critical to a security program than any other position in a corporate security structure, for a range of different issues. Direct access to the CEO, and I know many CSOs that would rather have that responsibility solely on the EP boss for a lot of different reasons and so forth. So I'd like to know what you guys think about that. Is an EP position more critical today than a chief security officer? No offense, Chuck.
I've been both. I mean, I think that they're different. EP is kind of focused. I'm going to say this. I am, again, I'll probably get email about this, but like, it's the closest thing to a specialized operation that you have in an organization. To be clear, that is not me saying close protection are special operators. I'm saying it is the closest thing in an organization to a specialized operation because you're so focused on that protection. And as we've all talked about in this podcast before and other places, protection now has grown way beyond gun gates, guards, come with me if you want to live, to, outwardly looking, forecasting, digital EP, all those things. So I think that narrowly focused activity is probably extremely important, Fred, and really hard to do changeovers and all that. Whereas I think organizationally, a CSO should be looking at everything. Now, is one more interchangeable than the other? That we could probably argue that on another podcast, but I think they need to be hand in hand. And I know when I was lead EP person at a Fortune 50, I had a very good relationship with my CSO and CEO, and he was very good in understanding that you have contact and you have access that I don't have. He never tried to get in the way of that, but then I was always good about if it was something that was organizational, I stepped out of my lane and said, I believe this is for you to deal with. Cindy, what do you add to that?
Well, I mean, I can only talk about, what I know from my perspective in my former life. I mean, you could say I was a CSO of a district when I was the SAC of an office. Um, you can say that I was a head or an assistant head of EP when I was on the president's detail. Um, you know, they do go hand in hand. They do have to have um, they need to be attached, really, and share information constantly. But I think you have to think about, to Fred's question, is EP more important or being held higher now? It's who we serve and who we protect. And if the CEO in a situation like happened with United Healthcare, think about what's happened to that organization, and you know, sure they'll recover, but there's damage. And so if you're the head of executive protection, you're protecting against not only keeping a body safe, but you're keeping an organization safe. So that goes back to the CSO of, hey, this is a group effort. This is a joint effort that we need to be working hand in hand to make sure that not only the body is safe, but the organization is safe.
We'll get back to the conversation in just a moment. But first, I wanted to let you all know that there's an easy way to stay informed about Ontic's upcoming events and new resources. Subscribe to our monthly newsletter and get updates sent directly to your inbox. Join the 20,000 plus security professionals and leaders who are already receiving these insights and sign up today. The link to subscribe is in the episode description. Yeah. Fred, let me ask you a question. I would like to I did not attend your session with Adrian about the Intel cycle, but I did hear some interesting, albeit good feedback on that. How was that session about strengthening your operation through the Intel cycle?
It was fairly well attended in my assessment. The room seemed to be packed, and we got a lot of good questions, surrounding the utilization of the Intel cycle. We've got a pretty decent white paper that you can download on our website, which I thought was pretty good. We all contributed to that. I think it was a good group effort to put that thing together, and you get back to the basics, which I keep always coming back to at times. Um, I think we have slipped to some degree with that, whether it be the basics of close protection, the basics of counter surveillance in the private sector. I've watched this evolution, and what struck me as Cindy was talking was, um, I need to verify this, but I think the actual development of executive protection historically was first before any other evolution in the corporate security space. And that was predicated on past assassinations and kidnappings and so forth. So that's worthy of additional study and probably a paper, Chuck and Cindy, to think about. But when you start thinking of this, just say as the industry has evolved over the past 50 years, let's say.
Well, I think there's also an amalgamation of I'm the chief security officer, and I'm also the EP lead, and I'm also the head in Intel, and I'm also my title happens to be chief security officer. That's not diminishing that role. That's just saying I think that would be interesting, and part of it would be I think under terms of titling in job descriptions, because I know many people that aren't titled EP lead, but they're leading EP, and they're probably are more out with the boss than they are thinking about insider risk programs and other things.
Yeah, when I first started, for example, back at State in the 80s, Chuck and Cindy, we had the concept of the regional security officer concept was one that was literally regional security based. You had very few agents at different places around the world, such as Panama, for example, and they would cover a range of countries, and so they would do it all from assisting with the Secretary of State's protective detail or the president's visit to whatever country they may be attending and so forth, and so that really kind of defined the chief security officer in many ways. That model kind of just followed into the private sector because you were literally a jack of all trades.
Cindy, I also want to ask you about the workplace violence prevention program, and I had to pull it up so I could remember everybody that was on there. It was you and Tom and Scott, and then Mike. Um, how was that? What were any insights from that you want to draw?
Yeah, we talked about, even though my training was about building a program, Tom Morrow went into, really good detail and told a story about how, and it kind of ties into Liz Wiseman's keynote about seeing, like finding a hole and filling it, basically. He was one day on the job and realized that there really was no workplace violence prevention program, and he built it from the ground up, and he worked on policy, and he created it. And it wasn't one of those things that he had to outsource. He did it all himself. So it was a really interesting story that he told, and both Mike and Scott talked about their experience with workplace violence, and especially in more of a retail setting. For them, it was the banking industry, and the difference between more um, kind of random acts of violence versus targeted violence. It was really interesting.
Uh, I something else I thought was well done is Ontic's Ankur Aurora, who had his debut at Ontic speaking on stage, but also he did a breakout called Security ROI, Proving the Value Within Your Organization. The thing I thought was interesting about that is he actually had a pamphlet. It wasn't just like, hey, value metrics. He actually had a pamphlet and a formula and walked people through managing and guiding metrics based on a certain data sets that he provided. And I know I think you can find that piece and download it on our website. But I thought it was interesting, something you don't see a lot in terms of that details. Here's how you do it, and here's a formula you can use. But I thought it was well done, and kudos to him on his inaugural effort. And of course, Fred, I'm going to drop the bomb. The number one panel EP that we did. I think it was myself and who was on that panel? It was me. It was Peter Jorgensen was his first panel, and then we had who was all on that panel? It was me, it was Peter, it was Trinity, and it was Jason. And then we had TJ and Jim sitting in the audience. Of course, y'all were there. But again, it goes back, I'm just poking fun at you, Fred, but I mean, and Stick was there. No, Stick was on the event panel. But I think it just goes back to what you said early on, Cindy, and you echoed, Fred, that like this, we had multiple assassination attempts. Then we had an executive that was murdered in December. Just goes to show the state of play and the environment and the impact that EP is having in our community right now.
Yeah, I agree with you, Chuck. I think that obviously that's one of these tripwire events that are infrequent in our business. Let's be honest. And when they do happen, it obviously raises everybody's attention. And then, I attended that session and I thought it was wonderful, Chuck. You did a real good job with that. And then I was sitting back and I actually mentioned to Jenny, who was sitting next to me, that look in this room. You have Apple and Walmart and Amazon. It was just kind of an amazing attendance that you rarely see in this industry. So I think it just shows you again how the importance of executive protection is to corporate industry today.
Well, we were lucky to. Sorry, the other person I don't know why I was forgetting, and Shane, I'll do 50 push-ups later. But we had Shane, and
Right,
Exxon ultimately.
ExxonMobil. Right.
I mean, we started off. They had the event. What was it, 10, 15 years ago
Yeah.
that brought
Resso's
him on in.
kidnapping.
So it was an interesting perspective, both historically and then also what people are doing today, and then of course to have a bit of technology discussion in there on how EP is growing beyond, like we said earlier, beyond just the guns, gates, guards to now so many more things that we have priorities and requirements, and everything that is a priority ultimately becomes a requirement at some point, and how the requirements just keep adding on, and what we have to do in the face of flat or declining budgets too.
I have requested an official recount, though, Chuck, because I do believe I had more people in my panel than yours. So expect the Ontic Audit Committee to be in touch shortly.
Indeed. Other thoughts or observations? I know we're only merely touching on the things that we saw, but it's always important, I think, to kind of get together and say, what are we just, and I would recommend this if you have a team or an organization, or you just have the same tribe that you run with in the security organization or security industry. After one of these conferences, don't let it go. Get people on a Zoom call, or go have an actual cup of coffee and say, what did we learn? What did we see? What's interesting? I mean, so as we kind of think about closing this up, I mean, was there any aha moments or any what's interesting other than what we've already talked about, Cindy?
I think the what I've seen just in our own internal comms is the fact that this was a great opportunity. Again, you said it earlier, Chuck, about not filling every minute of airspace with something that Ontic is providing, but giving the participants a chance to network and to talk about things and to talk about what they're doing and sharing, you know, sharing what's working. And I think that's what I took out of it, and what I'm seeing in comms that have followed is that, hey, this group talked to this group and they're seeing this, and they're using, this thing, and just that ability to collaborate, just that ability to really share, have that opportunity to share, not on Zoom, although Zoom's great, and but in person, in a place that's comfortable, and I think people are